Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the ins and outs of the Aviation Department's procurement process. We're very fortunate to have Ivy Silva present this session to you today. Ivy is one of two procurement managers at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, and she leads the Procure Phoenix section of the Contracts and Services Division. Ivy has over 20 years experience in professional contract management, and she's responsible for overseeing procurements, strategic sourcing, and e-procurements to ensure department staff in all three airports have the goods and services and the contracts needed to provide the highest level of service to our passengers, stakeholders, and the community. Ivy has expressed to me many times her love of procurements and contracts, and that's why she's always willing to share her knowledge to help bridge the gap for all vendors interested in doing business with the airport. Ivy, the runway is yours.
All right, good morning and welcome to Aviation Business Summit. My name is Ivy Silva and I'm a procurement manager in the Aviation Department. In today's workshop, I would like to first provide a high-level overview of some common procurement methods that we used in the Aviation Department and a review of key sections in a solicitation document, followed by sharing some tips with you in helping you to build an effective and responsive offer. By the end of the session, I hope that you walk away with a confidence on how to engage aviation for doing business. At the end of my presentation, there will be a Q&A session. Please feel free to submit questions through the chat box on your screen, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible. However, if we run out of time, I will be more than happy to follow up with each individual through emails. So if you are ready, let's begin with an overview of various types of contracts in the Aviation Department. Aviation had three different types of contracts: expenditure contracts, revenue contracts, and construction contracts. Expenditure contract, those are the type of contracts that city will pay money to secure goods and services that are required to meet our operational needs. Some contract examples such as custodial services, security guard services contract, and various type of maintenance and repair services contracts, as well as our financial consulting contracts. On the second type of contract, revenue contract, those are the contracts that requires you as a vendor to pay an airport an agreed upon fee to do business on the airport property. The terminal food and beverage and the retail concession type of contract all fall under this category. The last type of contract, the construction contract. The airport's construction opportunities and contracts are handled by street departments. Candy Kowalski is the procurement managers that oversee this area of business. Her email is listed on the slide, so feel free to send her an email if you would like to know more about the airport construction opportunities or have any questions related to the construction contracts. As most of you are aware, that city derives its contracts through majority of the contract we derive through a solicitation process. So if your company is going to participate in a city solicitation process in the near future, there is important policy that I would like to make you be aware, and that is called solicitation transparency policy. The purpose of this policy is to create a level playing field for all the participants in a solicitation process. This policy is also written in the Phoenix City Code, Chapter 43. It requires that all the participants in a solicitation process to contact the assigned procurement officer for any comments, questions, or concern about that particular solicitation. If your company violates this policy, unfortunately, it will be disqualified from going forward in a competing process. In the next slide, we will be talking about some major type of solicitation methods that we used in the aviation department. But before we jump into it, there's a quick story about myself that I would like to share with you. So the story is called, What Do I Want to Be When I Grow Up? Growing up, that question is constantly popping up. And my answer has always been the same. It's always when I'm asked, what do I want to be when I grow up? I always say, I want to be a procurement manager. You might wonder why that is, like many of my family's members and friends. And my answer hasn't changed. I want to be a procurement manager because I love shopping. And being a procurement manager, I can buy a variety of goods and services. The best part is using somebody else's money. So there you have it. So now let's get back on track to look at some common solicitation methods that we used for the expenditure contracts. There are 4 types of solicitation methods that we use. The request for quote, invitation, RFQ, invitation for a bid, IFB, request for proposals, RFP, and request for qualifications, RFQU. The RFQ and IFB, those 2 are basically price driven. What that meant is the lowest price gets the contract. The RFP and RFQU, on the other hand, they are not price driven, which meant that they are qualification based. And that means basically a company's qualification will be one of the essential evaluation criteria when we evaluate a proposal. Price is not the main determining factor in the RFP and RFQU. So in the end, if an offer that provides city the best value, that company will be recommended for a contract award. In the next section, let's look at the solicitation methods that we use to derive the revenue or concession type of contract. We use what we call revenue contract solicitation, RCS. And typically through this RCS process, we will derive our, as mentioned, the concession or revenue type of revenue generating type of contracts. In these slides, we were going to give you a quick overview of the type of information that are contained in our solicitation document. There are as many as up to 8 sections in our standard solicitation document. We will be talking more into detail in some key section after this slide, but before we leave this slide, I want to point out the last section or the last components in the solicitation document called small business outreach requirement. This requirement typically it's applied to our revenue contract solicitation, which is revenue generating type of contracts. Here we are going to share some key section in a solicitation document. First and foremost, the instruction section. Instruction section, it is the opening section in a solicitation document. It contains some key information such as solicitation timeline, minimum qualification, pre-award qualification, and award of contract. So the solicitation timeline, it is a table format that kind of provide outline the date and time for each major milestone in a solicitation document. For example, like when is the pre-bid conference? When is your offer due date and time? As far as for the minimum qualification and pre-award qualification, those 2 are mandatory requirements. In order for your offer to be accepted by the city and considered responsive, before you dive into preparing your offer, you may want to read through thoroughly on all the qualification outlined in these 2 areas, making sure that your company do meet the mandatory requirements outlined in these 2 sections. The award of contract in this paragraph, it provides the information to tell you how city will determine on awarding a contract. The next section, scope of work section. The scope of work section, we also call scope of services. It is the section that essentially is the meat part in a contract that details out all the city's expectation once you win the contract. We expect how you will deliver the services, some performance requirement. Does the work need to perform at nighttime, or it is okay during daytime? Is it required during holiday 24/7, 365 days a year? All will outline in this section, as well as some unique deliverables that city be expecting a vendor to provide if a vendor gets the contract. In the next section, another key section is our submittal section. In the submittal section, as you can see, there are quite a few information that are vital to your overall offer before your submittal. So for example, pricing, fee schedule. This is where you will provide your best and final offer in writing to the city. If the contract or the solicitation required you as the vendor to provide some warranty information, we certainly would like you to provide some subsequent or relevant information about the warranty. How do we go about it? Who do we call? Things like that. As far as license requirement, in certain type of solicitation, we will require vendor to carry some unique licenses. If we do require that in the solicitation document, definitely we would like you to share with us some of the license relevant information, your license number and where this license is from, things like that. The offer page, besides the signature to signify this is your official offer to the city, besides your signature, we also want to get to know a little bit about your company. So in this very same offer page, we will also require you to provide a little bit basic information about your company. The last item of the information in the submittal section is the references. It is city's standard bid evaluation process to conduct reference check. So city will require as a standard 3 references to be submitted in your offer package. The last key section in a solicitation document, it is the conflict of interest and solicitation transparency policy form. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation about this transparency policy, we are also towards the end of the solicitation document. We have a form which should have a list of questions for you to answer to confirm that with your submittal, there is no conflict of interest for you in submitting this, in submitting the offer for this solicitation, and that you did not violate the transparency policy. So in the end, before you complete the form, a signature is also required. So now you get to see some key sections in a solicitation document. In the next slide, I want to share with you some tips on how you can prepare an effective offer. First and foremost, ready, set, and go. How do you set your company up for success? Well, very importantly, you need to make sure that you read through and understand the solicitation requirements. If there's any question during your review of the solicitation document, attend the pre-bid or pre-offer conference is a good way to get your question answered. The pre-bid or pre-offer conference, it is an informational meeting that we provide to our potential offerer to kind of give an overview about the solicitation, and also to provide you a platform to ask questions. What happens if after the meeting you still have questions? Well, very importantly, look at the solicitation document to see when is the question due date. You want to make sure that you ask your question and submit it in writing before the set deadline. The second tip, on the lookout. So once city collect all the questions from our potential offer, the assigned procurement officer will basically will answer all the questions received in writing. So the answer to those questions will provide via a solicitation addendum. This solicitation addendum will be posted on the city solicitation website. It's the same website where you download your original solicitation document. So it is your responsibility to check often on that solicitation website to make sure there's no new solicitation addendum or no other new the solicitation related document that are posted on that website. Sometimes with the solicitation addendum, it may change the original contract scope, or which will then subsequently impact your pricing. So you want to make sure you are on the lookout for those solicitation addendum. The third tip, am I qualified? Earlier, when we were reviewing the instruction section, there were two mandatory requirements, the minimum requirement and the pre-award requirement. Before you dive in to prepare your offer for a solicitation, you may want to first review some mandatory requirement outlined in the solicitation document to make sure if you are qualified, if your company have met all the requirements that is outlined as a mandatory requirement. The fourth tip, getting ready. All right, how do I get ready to submit the offer? Well, before you finalize your offer, you want to make sure that you go through the solicitation document again, making sure that you double check, triple check, and even quadruple check on all the required documentation are all included in your offer. And sometimes, the requirement document can also include the bid response or the response guarantee. Those are typically required in a cashier's check format. You want to also include that piece of information as well. Also, remember when we were talking about the submittal section, city required you to provide the 3 references as part of the bid evaluation process. You want to make sure that you provide those information, and also give your references that you provide those person a heads up so that they are not caught off guard when we contact them for reference check. The last tip in how to prepare effective offer is bullseye. You are on target. So before you finalize your official offer and price to the city, you always want to review through the solicitation addendum to make sure, and also the solicitation document to make sure that all the other applicable requirements that will incur costs is all included, take it into consideration in your final offer. Those requirements can be badging costs, insurance certificate costs. So in the next slide, now you have prepared an effective offer. How do you make sure that when you submit your response, your offer, how do you make sure that it is also acceptable to the city and considered responsive? There are a few tips that I also want to share with you. First and foremost, you want to make sure that your company, besides registering with the city of Phoenix to become city vendor, you also want to register with the Arizona Corporate Commission. To be able to do business in the state of Arizona, to register with the Arizona Corporate Commission is also a requirement. So you want to make sure you register with these 2 areas. Second, when you submit your offer, you want to make sure you submit on time. When we say on time, it is our time, not your time. That means local Phoenix time. If your solicitation indicate, hey, your offer needs to submit by Wednesday, this Wednesday, 11 o'clock local Phoenix time. That is the 11 o'clock is local Phoenix time. Some company, they are from out of state, they will wish to submit an offer using the courier service. In that case, I will recommend you to make sure that your offer actually arrive 1 day before the due date. Sometimes what we see is some offer, they will make sure it arrive on the same day. But due to the custom issue, the offer may eventually be late. So if you are using the third party like UPS, FedEx, I will recommend you making sure your offer arrive 1 day before in case if there's any issue with the customs, then there will be sufficient time for it to get through and then get to our hand on time. The third tip, sign offer and submit. So earlier we mentioned about the offer page. It requires your signature. Make sure that the signature is completed on the offer page. In the past, we have seen some offer that submit the offer, but there was no signature on the offer page. In that case, it will be, unfortunately, city will not be able to accept the offer as your final and official offer to the city. So make sure that you sign the offer, and submitting the offer either in person to our aviation headquarters building, or you can submit electronically. All the instruction will be detailed out in the solicitation document. Tip number 4, documentation. Make sure, earlier we were talking about double, triple, and quadruple check with all the documentation that are required in a solicitation document. You want to make sure that if the solicitation require a insurance certificate, you may want to include that, technical documents, some samples, as well as the bid bond that we talked about earlier, and the response guarantee in a cashier's check format. You want to make sure those documents are included. Sometimes without the complete documentation, it will likely be accepted, depending on the situation, it will likely be accepted as a responsive offer. Tip number 5, no counter offer. City has set standard terms and conditions. City does not accept conditioned or counter offer to our standard terms and conditions. So very importantly, if you submit an offer with a conditioned or counter offer to in your package, unfortunately, we will unlikely be able to accept your offer as the official and being responsive offer. So making sure no counter offer or condition offer in your package. Tip number 6, satisfactory references. Earlier we mentioned about 3 references requirement. So making sure also give your references a heads up that this is coming. It's going. So when city contact them, it will not be catching them off guard. Sometimes we do, in the past, we do run into scenarios that some references, they were not giving heads up. Therefore, in the end, they kind of refuse to submit and provide the information to the city, and that is not good. So you want to submit not only verifiable references, but you also want to make sure that you give your references a heads up so that they will be willing to provide information in due time to the city. The last tip is resources and staffing info. If you are on your way to become a potential city vendor, a city notify you that you will be recommended for award of a contract. Now the next step is you want to go through the document, making sure you have sufficient staffing resources to make sure when the contract is awarded to you, there will be a seamless transition as far as the service delivery requirement, meaning the service delivery requirements. There's also a financial resources piece that you also need to take into consideration, such as the cost for the badging requirement and also your insurance costs. Earlier, we talked about in the very first tip, we talked about established business entity. So how, besides register with the Arizona Corporate Commission, here is, in this slide, has the information to share with you how you will register to become a city vendor. First and foremost, you want to register with City of Phoenix in the finance department. There is a system, vendor management system called Procure Phoenix. This is the vendors, the system that for vendor to register and become our vendor. And when you go to the website, there will be a phone number that is answered by a real person, so your question can get addressed easily and quickly. In addition, once you register to become a city vendor, Aviation also maintain our own database for all our vendors. if you would like to become one of the vendor for the aviation department specifically, feel free to submit all the required information on the slide and email to this bizopt.aviation@phoenix.gov. With that said, before we move into our Q&A session, here is my contact information. If in case I didn't get to your answer or after this meeting, you thought about some other question, please definitely reach out to me either via the phone or send me an email. I'm more than happy to provide the answer. And if I don't have the answer, I'll make sure connect you to the right person. And with that said, that concludes today's presentation. And now we will go into the Q&A session.
If anyone has any questions, please enter them in the chat box.
That's wonderful. There's no questions. So that means our offer out there, they are all ready to go.
A few more minutes for any questions. Ivy, have a question for you.
Sure.
Is this the same place to ask about placements of vending machines?
Is this, I think, yes, you can. However, I think that answer is gonna be a long drawn out. So let's make sure we get the contact information. I will answer that question through email. But in short, this vendor, the vending machine, that is typically going through what I mentioned earlier about the revenue contract solicitation methods. I believe that's in our near future plan to issue a solicitation regarding to this item.
We'll take the last call for questions. I have another question.
Sure.
For a service like voice announcements, fall under construction or professional services?
That will fall under the professional services.
All the questions we have.
All right. If you don't have question on the spot, and then you think of other question after our presentation today, you have my contact information. Feel free to send me an email. I will either provide you the answer or I will get you connected to the right person. And thank you for your time today.